If there were ever a time for us to be linking arms, it is today. In all that we are facing, oh, our need for one another. You see, isolated islands, we are not. We need each other in these desperate days. And that's exactly what I want to talk to you about today. You see, as an army, we need one another. What I want to talk to you about today is linking arms, the priority and the power of unifying for godly purpose. We find these words in 1 Chronicles chapter 11 and verse 10. These are the chiefs of David's mighty men, the ones who linked arms with him as he took up his kingship, with all Israel joining in, helping him become king in just the way God had spoken regarding Israel. Now the rest of this chapter and through chapter 12 tells the story of the warriors and these mighty men who joined David to establish a godly rule. Now what has just happened is that there has been the death of King Saul. King Saul has taken his own life. So there has been the death of man's rule and enter a new kind of rule, a godly kind of rule, a new rulership, King David. And we find then that they have now linked arms. Now with this in mind, listen again. These are the chiefs of David's mighty men, the ones who linked arms with him as he took up his kingship, with all Israel joining in, helping him become king in just the way God had spoken regarding Israel. Now with everything that's facing us today, with all the anxiety and the fear and the money problems and loneliness and fear, anxiety, all those things facing us, don't you think we need each other? Oh, I think so. And these mighty men risked their very lives to establish a godly rule. And do you think we need to be doing anything less than what these men and women did? I think not. You see, my friend, if we do not link arms together in this battle, we're not going to last long in this battle. Now, this story has 5 different principles I'd like you to listen to for just a moment. Number 1, we are called to be mighty men and women. Our passage says, David's mighty men. So we are to be people who are stalwart and strong and sturdy. So here's the question I ask of you. Are you strong? Are you stalwart? Are you sturdy? Are you a force to be reckoned with? Now, I don't mean to be caustic or arrogant or hard to get along with. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in your relationship with God. Are you strong? Are you stalwart? Are you somebody that really has that intestinal fortitude, if you will, to really be strong? You know where you're going to go. That's what David's mighty men, these warriors, had going for them. You see, they'd had enough of man's rulership and they wanted something different. You see, the captain of our salvation, that's one of his names, is literally depending upon us. And God is calling us to be mighty men and women. The second principle, God is calling us, we are called to link arms. Our passage says, who linked arms with him. You see, men and women on the battlefield know well this linking arms, this linking hearts, because they have each other's back. They know this principle. All the way back in the Civil War and World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, those even in the War on Terror know well that they have each other's back. They need to link arms. And these mighty men, these warriors understood. They saw something in David, something good, something wholesome, something that they said, I want to link arms with David. This was God's choice. And they said, I want to link arms. So here's the challenge that I believe God is saying to you and to me, to be very careful and to select well, very carefully, who you align yourself with in business, in relationships, in church, in romance, and in marriage. Be very careful, because you're a mighty man and woman in God, and you are to link arms with one another carefully, but select those people, because you see, that speaks of accountability, and when you're accountable, you grow. The third principle, we are called to claim all that he promised us. Our passage says he took up his kingship helping him become king. Notice with me, David engaged the promises of God. In other words, he put on the kingship. He became the king. It's just like the armor of God in Ephesians chapter 6. You have to put on the armor of God. It's something you put on. You have to lay claim to the promises that God has given to us. My friend, don't live beneath your privilege because he has more in store. Lay claim to what God has already promised us. 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 4 says this, He has given us his great and precious promises so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. In other words, we can be like Jesus, all because of the promises. When you lay hold of the promises, you begin to become like Jesus. King James says we are partakers of divine nature. We begin to become like Jesus, but we have to lay hold of those promises. Mighty man and woman of God, when you link arms, you lay hold of those promises, you begin to realize all that God is and all that God has in store, but you have to lay hold of those promises and put on those promises and engage those. And so, my friend, receive and embrace, engage, put on those promises. So, my friend, here's the great question. What promise or what promises has God given to you that you've not yet laid hold of? Now, our fourth principle in our story is that we are called to unity. Our passage says that with all Israel joining in, notice it wasn't 30 or 70 or 80%, but it was all of Israel joining together as a team, unified together to establish a godly rule. Unity with linked arms. Now, it reminds me of the story in Joshua chapter 6 of Jericho. It says that Jericho was tightly shut up. No one came in, no one came out. So God gave them a perfect battle plan. God says, I want you to have a parade. In other words, he says, I just want you to go around the city. That's it. Go home, mind your own business, and then come back and do the same thing day after day, all the way to day 6. Now, the first couple of days, it was probably pretty mundane. But can you imagine the excitement began to grow because they went shoulder to shoulder, linked arms. And God, I believe, with divine design, had them do that to show them that they needed to lay claim to the promises of God as mighty men and women, linked arms, and to lay claim and to have a spirit of unity. And it was powerful because that excitement began to grow all the way to day 6. And then when they gave that 7th day shout, those walls fell and they devoted that city to God. Man, you talk about excitement. You talk about exciting. And they devoted that city to God. You see, my friend, we need to have walls fall today. The walls of pride and prejudice and fear and anxiety and all of our financial stress and loneliness, let the walls fall as we march together with linked arms in a spirit of unity and to devote that city to God, those things to God, and to devote our surroundings to God in a spirit of unity. Now, the 5th principle is we are called to do things God's way. Our passage says this, just the way God had spoken. You see, King Saul had been doing things man's way. And again, our mighty men and all these warriors, men and women, had said, enough is enough. And they said, we want to do things God's way. And so they did. They took things in God's hands and in their hands and said, we want to establish God's throne. You see, what America needs is God. Hey, we've tried everything else. Why not do things God's way? And so they did it. They did things God's way. You see, my friend, Israel never knew greater territorial expansion, strength, military expanse, greater prosperity, honor, or finer days than under the rulership of King David, a godly man with godly, unified order. And I would submit to you today that when we put to death Saul's order and we establish a godly order, we will never know greater favor, greater joy, greater strength, greater expansion of our influence, even greater military strength as a country or as an individual or as a church. We will never know greater days than under a godly rulership. That's what God's trying to say to us today. And so for life, there's an app for that. These warriors joined David to establish a godly throne. In 1 Chronicles chapter 11, we've already looked at verse 10, but if you look at the rest of that chapter, you will find the balance of that story, how they established that godly throne, and even into chapter 12, how these men and women believed for God and they established that godly throne. I love how chapter 12, verse 40 concludes. It says, "There was joy in Israel." My friend, whenever God's rule is established, there is great joy. I have found that, and God wants that for your life as well. That's the promise of God. And so, my friend, do you hunger to be listed in this list? Well, then, enlist. Be a part of what God has designed and resourced for you. God desires there to be joy for you. So, link arms. Choose to find those people that you can totally trust. Link arms with God and with somebody else. Aren't you weary of Saul's rulership in your life, the old man's kind of rule? I know I am. So link up with God, link up with someone else, and let there be godly kind of rule. And devote the city to God. Let the walls fall. God is saying, link arms today. Establish His rule and know favor and joy. As with Saul, let there be a death to your old way, and let there be a David kind of rule come upon your life into the throne of your life. And that all begins with you linking arms with God and linking arms with someone else. That is what God is trying to say for us, to link arms. Let God arise.